The most effective method to lose stubborn fat, belly, butt, hips and thighs. In the event that you need to realize how to consume difficult fat, you need to comprehend a couple of key focuses. I understand numerous individuals who read the Metabolic Effect blog are not keen on the science and simply need to realize what to do. For those sorts, please avoid down to the area called outline and action steps. To begin with, let's audit the fat-consuming procedure. With the goal for fat to be lost from a specific territory, the accompanying occasions need to happen. Fat should be discharged from a fat cell. This procedure of fat breakdown and discharge is designated lipolysis. Fat should be brought to another cell through the circulation system. Poor blood stream to a zone implies moderate fat misfortune from a territory. Fat needs to enter another phone to be singed. This procedure of fat really being scorched is designated lipid oxidation. It is essential to note here that since fat is stalled and discharged, lipolysis doesn't consequently mean it will discover its way to another cell and at last be copied, lipid oxidation. It could be re-established, and this is regularly the situation in individuals who are very insulin safe. Brief organic chemistry review. To additionally comprehend difficult fat, we have to cover some essential natural chemistry first. Fat enters or leaves fat cells mostly because of the action of two proteins, lipoprotein lipase (LPL), which acts to store fat, and hormone touchy lipase (HSL), which acts to discharge fat. Notice the name of the significant fat discharging compound is called hormone delicate lipase and not calorie touchy lipase, which is as it should be. HSL discharges fat because of motioning of a compound called cyclic AMP. What's more, this is affected by the movement of hormone receptors in fat tissue called adrenergic receptors (AR). There are two kinds of adrenergic receptors: alpha adrenergic receptors and beta adrenergic receptors. The alpha receptors moderate fat discharge and beta receptors speed fat discharge. To keep this straight in your mind, think A for against consume and B for consume. Notwithstanding affecting fat discharge straightforwardly, these receptors likewise sway bloodstream. Increasingly alpha receptors mean less bloodstream to a zone, and progressively beta receptors mean more prominent bloodstream to a region. Hormones and stubborn fat. So what makes difficult fat increasingly obstinate? Fat increase or misfortune is around two things: calories and hormones. In any case, difficult fat might be increasingly affected by hormones contrasted with different sorts of fat. Numerous kinds of hormones sway fat addition and fat misfortune. These hormones have this effect in view of their immediate or circuitous impacts on the compounds and receptors we just referenced. Hormones that store fat will in general increment the number or action of alpha receptors and additionally LPL. Hormones that animate fat discharge increment the number or action of beta receptors as well as HSL. Certain hormones have a clear effect on fat addition or misfortune. For instance, insulin is a fat-putting away hormone since it expands LPL action and stifles HSL action. Insulin additionally disables the typical capacity of beta receptors, which is another type of HSL hindrance. For example, insulin brings down HSL movement legitimately and in a roundabout way by means of beta receptor interruption. Catecholamines, adrenaline and noradrenaline to our UK, European companions, and epinephrine and norepinephrine to us Americans, speed fat discharge when they tie beta receptors, which would build HSL movement. Be that as it may, they can likewise slow fat discharge when they tie alpha receptors. This is one reason obstinate fat, which has a higher centralization of alpha receptors, can be so delayed to react. Different hormones have progressively mind-boggling and covering movement. Estrogen appears to both increment the number and movement of alpha adrenergic receptors. The female fat conveyance, where fat is put away in the lower body, is essentially because of the effect of estrogen. The subcutaneous fat and particularly the lower body subcutaneous fat of ladies is more extravagant in estrogen receptors. Thyroid hormone expands beta receptor movement, obstructs the action of alpha receptors and works contrary to estrogen, making difficult fat less obstinate. Be that as it may, thyroid hormone is upset itself by estrogen, one reason ladies have bigger thyroid organs contrasted with men. Is your head turning yet? Try not to stress, it will all bode well soon. Here are a couple of takeaways in regards to difficult fat when all is said and done and some hormonal impacts to remember. Obstinate fat has progressively alpha receptors. Obstinate fat has less beta receptors. Obstinate fat stores progressively fat and discharges less of it affected by insulin. Obstinate fat has less blood course through it. Hormones that expansion HSL action as well as repress LPL movement invigorate fat discharge. Hormones that decline HSL movement as well as invigorate LPL activity energize fat stockpiling. Calories matter as well. It is difficult to store fat paying little heed to hormonal activity in a low-calorie state, and it is probably not going to lose fat on the off chance that you are in calorie abundance. Obstinate fat is difficult not on the grounds that it can't be discharged, but instead in light of the fact that it discharges fat considerably more gradually contrasted with less difficult fat. The sex steroids, estrogen, progesterone and testosterone, have receptors in fat tissue and assume a significant job in HSL, LPL movement just as affect alpha versus beta receptor number and action. The most obstinate sorts of fat. So dependent on the focuses above, where are the most difficult sorts of fat? We store fat in a few better places. There is fat put away just underneath the skin. We call this fat subcutaneous fat. This is the stuff that hangs over your belt. At that point there is fat we store somewhere down in our center zone around our organs. Another name for organs is viscera, and under our stomach muscles. This fat is called instinctive fat. This is the stuff that gives numerous men that huge distending stomach. You can't squeeze this stuff. At last there is fat put away in and around our muscles. This is called intramuscular fat. The most obstinate fat on the body is the fat under our skin, the subcutaneous fat. Female subcutaneous fat is progressively obstinate contrasted with male subcutaneous fat. The most difficult fat in most of ladies is lower body subcutaneous fat around the hip, butt and thighs, additionally called saddle sacks, thunder thighs or air pocket butts. The most difficult fat on men is the subcutaneous fat of the lower mid-region, regularly called the cushy layers. So here is the manner by which it separates. Subcutaneous fat is unmistakably progressively difficult contrasted with instinctive fat. Subcutaneous fat is difficult in light of the fact that it is progressively responsive to insulin, has lower blood gracefully and has increasingly alpha receptors. Instinctive fat is less difficult in light of the fact that it has progressively beta receptors, more prominent bloodstream and is less responsive to insulin. Female subcutaneous fat in the lower body has around 9 to multiple times progressively alpha receptors contrasted with male lower muscle to fat ratio. The spot on men that is most difficult is the lower stomach fat and extra padding territory. The spots that are generally difficult on ladies are the seat sacks, internal thighs, butt and lower tummy fat. Another explanation difficult fat is obstinate is because of poor blood flexibly. Both the way that it is in colder regions and has progressively alpha receptors make this so. Obstinate fat is affected legitimately or by implication by a wide range of sorts of hormones. These hormones effectively affect the movement of HSL and LPL just as alpha and beta receptors. The stunning truth about abstaining from excessive food intake and difficult fat. One of the most baffling things identified with difficult fat is that abstaining from excessive food intake doesn't resist. Truth be told, eating less junk food makes difficult fat progressively obstinate. Let me delay down here and let you take that in for a moment. At the point when you start a better eating routine, and by diet I mean the mainstream approach of eating less and practicing more, the final product is that you will regularly make your fat parts fatter. Numerous individuals don't know, however, eating fewer carbs has never been demonstrated by research to work as time goes on. Indeed, it has really been demonstrated not to work. 95% of individuals who go on abstains from food wind up recovering the entirety of the weight, and 66% of those individuals end up fatter than they were before they begun the eating routine. At the point when they recover the weight, its greater part goes directly to the obstinate fat regions. Depressing, I know. At the point when you diet by the well-known strategy for eating less and practicing more, the law of metabolic pay kicks in. I consider it a law since it is presumably the most unsurprising and settled upon marvels in the entirety of abstaining from excessive food intake. I am not going to experience this compensatory impact of consuming less calories in detail here, yet I did a top-to-bottom blog on this in the past. You will need to audit. That article is here. So, this is the manner by which eating less junk food, eating less and practicing more, makes your fat parts fatter. In the first place, compensatory changes happen that make you increasingly eager, cause unsteady vitality and make unquenchable desires for unhealthy satisfactory food. This is the reason 95% of individuals restore all the weight or more. Simultaneously, thyroid hormone levels decay and the fat cells themselves become progressively responsive to insulin. This implies HSL is turned down, less fat discharge, LPL is turned up, progressively fat stockpiling, and alpha receptor action is raised and beta receptor movement is suppressed. Keep in mind, obstinate fat is difficult as a result of the alpha receptors, so we unquestionably don't need those troublesome folks being any increasingly dynamic. The entirety of this makes the fat cell unquestionably progressively covetous, increasingly fat stockpiling, and miserly, less fat consuming. For what reason did I set aside the effort to experience all that? In such a case that you would like to beat difficult muscle versus fat, you need to initially understand that eating less junk food is harming instead of helping your endeavors. To beat obstinate fat, one of the main things you have to do is escape the eat less, practice more outlook. Outline and action steps. Presently we can get into how to lose difficult fat. Here are the 3 stages in advance, and I will dive into subtleties beneath. Quit consuming less calories. Move from an eat less exercise more methodology (ELM) to either an eat less, practice less (ELEL) or an eat more, practice more (EMM) application.